Michael Knowles and Kyle Kulinski have both interviewed Jen. Now, as you can imagine, the conversations were very juxtaposed in many ways. With that being said, when Jen was a candidate, as she pointed out, she didn't exactly have the opportunity to give Michael Knowles a piece of her mind the way that she would have liked. I certainly understand that sentiment. Yes, he did, Jen. You went on with Kyle and Crystal on Crystal, Kyle and Friends, I think is what they call it, or if they're still doing that show. But anyway, I think it's imperative that we understand why these guys that are paid have no ideology. They don't have anything that they stand for. But what I'm also going to explain is why there is a lack of seriousness taken with left content creators. Here we go.
Agree with all of it, but I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
No, because we don't have a right to act like this around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And they used to at least lie to us in the past and say that this is good for the world and we're spreading freedom and democracy. Now they don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism where they say, we're going to take the oil. And the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires. And this, to piggyback on what Dave Smith said, is frankly not what many of the MAGA voters thought they were signing up for. They thought America first actually meant America first. By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime. Congratulations on that. It's also been now a week straight of pro-regime protests. Now you have roving gangs of Venezuelan militias that are kidnapping Americans. But again, I come back to the fundamental point, which is if you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because we can and we have the right to do it and we have bigger guns and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law or was that all a joke? Are we rolling the clock back to the 1700s and the 1800s and we're going super primitive style here? And I think the answer to that is yes, they want to go super primitive style.
International law goes back to antiquity. It's not some creation of modernity, whether we're talking about the 1700s or the 20th century.
The Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal?
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
So 2 observations here. Number one, Kyle is correct in that there is this the Don Roe doctrine reenacting this idea of manifest destiny, but we all know what the premise is. It's that the devaluing of the dollar due to BRICS nations coalescing and trying to trade internationally outside of the petrodollar, which will inevitably sink the US dollar as it is being sunk already and has been for quite some time. So the whole concept of let's take over the Western Hemisphere becomes that much more appealing to even those that might be on the fence, fearing the collapse of the American empire. So on the one hand, I totally get that. On the other hand, you also have Michael Knowles looking like the Burger King guy. The only thing missing is the crown, and making a complete fool of himself, trying to discuss what international law is and isn't. And so I bring this up because if you look at these 2 specimen on the screen and you didn't know where their politics stood, I would say that it would appear, again, it would appear that they are not doing such a good job. For whatever reason, when you see people, I would say, conducting themselves in a certain way in terms of their overall aesthetic, you can end up turning a lot of people off and them not even listening to what you have to say in terms of your content if you present yourself in such a way that makes you look like a caricature. And in the case of Kyle and Michael, they are doing that in spades. That's why I frame it right here, because this kind of sets the standard in many respects as to why they have this, again, it's like a cartoon. But that's not what this is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about, should the United States be taking on this role of manifest destiny all over again, which is warmongering, nation building, pillaging of resources, period. And the answer, of course, is no, we should not be doing that. But that also shows the gaping hole in the American system where we don't have anything really made here in the States anymore. Most of the manufacturing is done overseas. And so by not having a stable infrastructure at home, we are kind of reliant on, essentially the worst of the worst people having control of what's going on nationwide and worldwide. And their interests are, well, I'm living in the here and now. I'm not concerned about we, the people. I'm concerned about me and my cohorts. So in the end, Kyle is right about this. Michael is wrong, but that doesn't mean that it isn't made for good entertainment.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
because we looked at piles of millions of dead bodies, and we said that's a bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws. And Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico.
You hear what he said? Like they always do. And this is, again, why Michael Knowles is such a douchebag. And keep in mind, he works for Ben Shapiro. So would it surprise you that he has these talking points? Probably not. But when he says we bombed narco-terrorists, there has been no proof whatsoever that anyone that was bombed in Venezuelan waters were more than fishermen. So the idea that he's going along with this talking point is asinine. I can't for the life of me understand how anyone can't see through this. This idea that they're bringing fentanyl and all these other, again, you can tell when they're getting their talking points, the pro-war talking points. And it's obvious that for Knowles, this is a paying job. Please stop putting that up there. So again, at the end of the day, I cannot understand what leg Michael Knowles is trying to stand on here. He has got no answer whatsoever for basic, I wouldn't even say questions, I would just say basic statements from Kulinski, because he's right. What is the justification for trying to start war in Venezuela, much less continuing war in Gaza and Ukraine, and eventually saber rattling in Taiwan? There is none, except for the very few at the top that will seek to benefit from this, and they will pay grifters like Knowles through the Daily Wire to put these talking points out there, even if it's not true. Remember what George Costanza once said, it's not a lie if you believe it.
And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump could do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train, or are you going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life?
No, there have been plenty of Trump policies that I've criticized because he's only right about 99.78% of the time.
Now, if somebody made a statement that was in, let's say, the Democratic Party or somebody who's adjacent to the Democratic Party and said that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are right 99.78% of the time, you would call them a hack, wouldn't you? You would call them a cuck, wouldn't you? Yes. Well, Kyle's going to pick up the slack.
So the First Step Act, I thought, was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the the administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's
my problem is that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding Trump.
Why do you say
that?
You
know that what he's doing in imperialism and you don't care.
I just answered your question. And I corrected
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal, pedophile, rapist?
See, you don't have to go there because, again, just go with what you can prove, Kyle. Donald Trump is a war criminal. And to me, that's more than enough. So if you're a war criminal, I would say that that in itself is a pretty substantial problem. And you want to say that he's a pedophile protector, that's verifiably true. I would absolutely use that. But if you're trying to get people to see your argument, it's very important that you are concise about that. Whoever's doing that in the back, please stop. I want to be very clear that I agree with Kyle on these points. I do not agree with Michael Knowles even a little bit. In fact, he's one of the biggest hacks out there. But again, anybody who's adjacent to Ben Shapiro is going to be a hack of hacks because it's all about money and power. There is no moral clarity in their statements. There can't be. The biggest problem with Michael Knowles is that he claims to be a pious Christian, like in a very big way. Like he's of that Jerry Falwell moral majority mindset, that he's a special person and the rest of us are just sinners. He's a saint. Not really.
You brought up a point. You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. That, excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did in fact fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself with your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question.
Hang on,
Piers, let me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
I don't know.
So you don't know the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela, and yet you want to go to war in Venezuela, which I think, again, you can say is a gotcha, but in many respects, it's just proof positive that the average person doesn't know diddly squat when it comes to politics. And but I want to make something very clear here. While Kyle is making all of these points that I do agree with regarding endless war and what is happening here, there's two things that you have to keep in mind. Number one, he is absolutely 1,000% going to sell the Democratic Party in the midterms and in the next election cycle, because that's what he and Crystal Ball do. You could say it's for their career. You could say it's their ideology. It's what they truly believe. And you would be right in both respects. He can be right here, but he could also be wrong in the long run, because while he is correct about what Trump is doing wrong and Michael Knowles being a complete kiss-ass sycophant, the solution is not to sheep herd people back into the Democratic Party, including the most recent $3.3 billion add-on to the latest bill passed that is being sent to Israel. You know who signed on for that bill? Ro Khanna, who was supposed to be the person that we agree with right now politically that is doing a decent job. But the devil is always in the details. And I have no doubt, whether it's Ro Khanna or AOC, that is going to run for president in the progressive lane in 28. Whoever it is, whether it's one or both, there is going to be a bullhorn the size of the Statue of Liberty coming from Kyle Kulinski saying support these two candidates in the Democratic Party primary and support them for president. And you know what else he's likely going to do? He's going to tell you to support Gavin Newsom if he's the nominee, because we have to defeat the Republicans. We are never getting out of this. Now, I saw the Gavin Newsom interview with Lil Ben, and we will discuss that on Monday. I just want to make very clear that regardless of what he says, what he thinks, I don't think Kyle can be taken seriously when he wears his sunglasses at night. And I can understand why people would be turned off by it. Kyle Kulinski makes a lot of money. He's got the gold plaque to prove it. And while I think his takes are good in a number of instances, they're also not good in other instances. And this is a prime example of where you have to be able to have a nuanced opinion about politics. No, I don't think he looks like a pimp. I think he looks like a wannabe Backstreet Boy. That's what it looks like to me. But regardless of what it looks like, it's not a look that the average Politico would take seriously. And over the past few years, his look has given way to, we'll just say, arrogance, And that's not a good look. You can make a good point, but when the surface dressing, it's almost like having a great cover of a book. Sometimes you judge a book by its cover. But if you know the writer's good, you know that you can continue. When the writer has a mixed message and the cover looks shitty, then it's probably worth passing. The only reason I did this clip tonight wasn't to laud Kyle, but to prove what a cuck and a hack Michael Knowles truly is. And who does Michael Knowles work for again? Oh yeah, that's right. Lil Ben Shapiro. That's his boss. And he's his bitch.